In business today, three things to know. First, it's business as usual for the EU. Election results for the European Union Parliament are met with stock market rallies because overall nothing is pretty much going to change. Then, follow the yellow brick road. More signs the U.S. economy is on the right path and the wizard of the Fed is leading the way. And in the corner office, the COO of Torchlight Energy will talk oil prices and his view of new cap and trade regulations. A Rise Exchange for this Tuesday starts now. Hello, everyone. I'm Andrew Schmertz. Investors came back from the long weekend tanned, rested, and ready to buy stocks. The S&P 500 hit new highs on Tuesday as a series of economic reports bolstered optimism. Here are some key data points. Consumer confidence rose amid signs of an improving job market and the economy coming off its winter doldrums. The Conference Board says its index in May up to 83. That's up from 81.7 in April. And orders for U.S. manufactured goods, products expected to last 3 years or longer, unexpectedly rose in April by 0.8%, the Commerce Department said today. That's taking us to the closing numbers on Wall Street. A strong day. The Dow Jones Industrial Average closing up 69 points to 16,676. That's a new record high for the S&P 500, up 1140 to 1911. And the NASDAQ up 51.26 to 42.37. Some of the top stocks we're watching today. Bank of America says it's resubmitted its stress test capital plan to the Federal Reserve after disclosing it made a $4 billion error last month. Oops. The mistake forced the bank to suspend its plans for returning capital to shareholders. You think? Bank of America closing at 15.23. A judge in southern Iran has ordered Facebook founder and CEO Mark Zuckerberg to appear in court to answer complaints that company-owned applications Instagram and WhatsApp violate users' privacy. Facebook closing up 209. I'm sure he's on a plane headed right there now. And Apple reportedly gearing up to unveil its new smart home technology at its World Developer Conference next week. The software allows the iPhone to control lights, security systems, and other household appliances. Apple has been on fire lately, up 1133 to 625.46. Some analysts are saying the company has its mojo back. We shall see. Taking a look at commodities. Gold down 25.20 to 12.66. Oil pulling back just a little bit, but at highs for the quarter at 104.13. Should we be upbeat about the economy? Joining us now from Chicago is Jack Ablin, Chief Investment Officer at BMO Private Bank. Jack, welcome back to a Rise Exchange.
Thank you, Andrew.
So let's start with consumer confidence. This is obviously a big psychological test for the economy. The economy is based on consumers, and that's based on the psychology of consumers. Why the rise here in confidence?
Well, the rise in confidence, a lot to do with asset values. Portfolio values are up. Stock values are up. Housing prices are up, and that generally corresponds to strong confidence. I think the job market's pretty good. In fact, I find a pretty high correlation between consumer confidence and, not surprising, retail sales. So that should support the retail activity that we have right now.
And retail sales up, some say, because, and I hate to go back to the weather excuse again, but it appears that there was some legitimate weather concerns when it was so darn cold out and snowy and icy that people didn't go outside, and that probably hurt optimism among consumers. They were just depressed.
It did. You know, I think that, no one's going to go try to drive test drive a new car while there's, 2 feet of snow on the ground. So I do think that there's something to that. I also found that, especially late last year and early this year, that retail activity was coming in higher than what consumer confidence would have suggested, and I was a little bit worried about that gap. But now it looks like confidence is catching up to where retail is. So I'm not expecting retail to expand much, but I do think now that at least there's a decent support for what we've got.
Is there any possibility then that we're going to get a slightly stronger gross domestic product number for the quarter?
Yeah, I'm not an economist, but I would say that I would imagine that economists are ramping up their forecast. That durable goods number that came in at 0.8, I think economists as a group were expecting negative growth. So I think that was a big about face, and that could go into raising some forecasts.
Jack, there is a bugaboo in all these reports, and that is a technical term, bugaboo. And it comes to the housing market. Prices for homes are sort of slowing in their increases, and there's been some concern about weakness because the investor community has kind of been done. And now we're turning towards, basically homeowners. Is the housing market a concern here? Because asset prices, as you just mentioned, are a key indication for consumer confidence.
Yeah, I do think that the housing is a concern. In fact, probably the weakest leg of the recovery is housing. People focus on existing housing. I mean, that's just turnover of existing homes. It's really not. New homes is really what drives that market. Unless you sell drapes or something, I'm not sure that existing home sales is going to drive a heck of a lot. On the other hand, new home sales off about 500,000 from what we would have been comfortable expecting over the last several years. And that is driven exclusively by household formations coming in lower than what demographics would suggest. So I have done a little work on that subject. What we're finding is, not a surprise, young people are waiting to get married. Married people are having fewer kids. The whole demand for new housing seems to be put off for a couple of years.
That's actually a really interesting take, Jack. Basically, because of a demographic shift, maybe we were building the wrong type of houses.
That could very well be, Andrew. I mean, the fact is, like I said, we've been, roughly at a million and a half, and now we're at 500,000, and so we're below where we would have expected. I think demographics, just the number of young people out there, would suggest we should build 1 million homes a year. We're not at that level right now.
Hopefully not everyone is just staying home with their parents. One last question on the stock market. A lot of people are waiting for a correction to occur. What's your take?
Well, I do think the market's expensive. In fact, by some measures, I would argue it's 20% overvalued relative to its historic medians. But we've got strong liquidity. We've got an accelerating economy. So I think we could patch over some valuation while we have those forces as a tailwind. I am watching credit spreads. I am watching the economy. If it looks like any of these factors are going to pull back in any way, I'm probably going to use that as an opportunity to reduce risk. But for right now, my bottom line is if you're in, stay in. If you're not in, look for ways to try to get in at perhaps lower prices and pullbacks.
From BMO Private Bank in Chicago, Jack Ablin, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Election for the European Parliament dealt a surprise to the mainstream parties. While moderates and centrists will remain in control, upstart anti-EU groups had a powerful showing. Those groups are described by the New York Times as rebellious outsiders, neo-Nazis, and xenophobes. What does this mean for the future economy of Europe? Joining us now from Washington, D.C. is our friend Ivan Eland, director of the Center on Peace and Liberty. Ivan, welcome back to Arise Exchange.
Thanks for having me back, Andrew.
Let's start with the basic question of what is the European Union Parliament and what does it do?
Well, it's getting an increasing role. It didn't used to have much of a role at all, but under the Lisbon Treaty 4 years ago, it has more role in choosing the president of the European Commission, which is the executive branch and has the real power in the EU. And so it's not totally devoid of power anymore. And I think certainly these elections do mean something. And traditionally, when the economy is bad, as it has been in Europe, you get sort of a nativist backlash. And that's what you're seeing here. I think that happens in any region of the world, but it's happening in Europe because the European economy has been so bad. When people feel that foreigners are taking their jobs, they vote for more extreme parties. But I think Europe is still a stable place, and you saw that mostly mainstream people won.
And that was certainly a relief to the markets that the mainstream candidates won. Was there a legitimate concern that the shift in power might have been more significant?
I think that there was fear. Anytime you have right-wing parties come up, of course, with the specter behind the scenes is fascism again, and that's always been behind the scenes. But I think we're far away from that in reality because the economy, I think, in Europe is at least improving a little bit, and that we don't seem to have the acute crisis that we did. Now, that's not to say that something couldn't come up and we couldn't have another problem. But anytime you have a severe economic crisis, the fascism looms over the political landscape.
And especially when it comes to immigration, doesn't it? Which is an important issue for anyone's economy. When the economy is poor, you get this rise of anti-immigration policies. We've seen that especially in France. Does the results of this election either hurt or help that?
Well, I think, there was some gains and that sort of thing. But I think, by and large, these were at the margins. And I think that the election really, most of the mainstream people won, I think, in the end. And that's usually what's predicted. You may see it increase around the margins. I think you're going to have a more acute crisis than we've had to really have a problem with the extreme right-wing parties taking over.
You and I have talked a lot about the Ukraine. They held elections with a billionaire businessman, Poroshenko, winning. What policies do we expect out of him?
Well, I think he probably will challenge the separatists, but also on economics, I think he may be the best chance for Ukraine. The Ukrainian economy is in terrible shape, and it's whipsawed between the EU and Russia. And his position has been, I want to get along with both of these people. And I think the Ukrainians should start dealing from a position of strength. Both of these camps want them in there, and so they should play one off against the other. They don't have to, even though they have a bad economy and they're going to have some aid from both sides. I think they can, negotiate because Ukraine is a prize, and both the EU. What started this crisis was the EU wanted to make their relationship exclusive, and of course, the eastern parts of Ukraine and Crimea didn't like that, and of course, the Yanukovych rejected it, and that's when we led to the problem. And so I think the European Union hopefully has learned its lesson from that, and maybe the Russians have too. So I think this middle ground that he's at least saying he's going to follow may be the best for Ukraine.
Okay, Ivan Eland, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Coming up, the president's cap and trade policy and what it means for businesses. You're watching Arise Exchange.
If I was building my own news network, first thing I think I'd want high-quality reporters, very educated, intelligent people.
Hello, I'm Francesca Maxime.
I'm Julian Phillips.
I'm Wendy Gillette.
I'm Sophia Song Hai.
I'm Gary Anthony Ramsey. Thank you for joining us here in New York City.
I would like to see more people of color represented in high positions in media.
We've got world-class journalists, veteran journalists who have been in this industry for decades, not just in front of the camera, but behind the scenes as well.
People need to understand the problems that are going on in the community are much closer than we actually think they are.
Kayla Phillips is one of the shoppers who is suing Barney's, and she is here with her attorney. What is it that you want from them?
Not to judge every African-American person that comes in your store.
The best part of the day for me is when Arise America goes on the air. It's the opportunity for me to tell the stories that I've learned about all day long, and also to talk to some of the smartest, most experienced experts on any number of news topics and explain not just what's happening, but what it means to us. That's the one thing that's great about Arise America. We don't just tell the news, we also seek to understand why it matters.
The U.S. Environmental Protection Agency will release its new plan on climate change next week. The proposal will reportedly allow states to use cap-and-trade systems, flexibility to meet carbon reduction goals instead of placing emission limits on individual plants. With more on what we can expect from the proposal, Arise News Washington Bureau Chief James Blue joins us now from D.C. James, give us an overview of what cap-and-trade is and how it's going to apply here to the states.
Well, cap and trade is actually a Republican idea that tries to create a pollution market. It basically allows companies to pay for permits to pollute more than they're allowed to.
And they take it from others, right? It's a cap and trade. Right.
That's right. There's a cap sort of set where companies can pollute, and if they want to pollute more than that, they can buy and sort of trade permits from other companies. So it's a real system that's market-based, that was proposed by Republicans, and it allows, on a national level, to sort of change and interchange between polluting.
And this is a major change in policy for the administration, is it not?
It is. It's a recognition that they were never going to get any type of climate change out of this Congress and the likely next Congress, which will even be more Republican. And so it's a real admission that the executive president has to do in order to create more regulation, which they believe will really help with the sort of staunch Democrats who really, really support this.
And of course, the other side of that, though, is that there's an argument that he's legislating from the executive branch once again, even though, as you mentioned, cap and trade was first proposed, I think, under the Bush administration.
It was, and it really is just the reality of this presidency. There's no effort and no movement in Congress, so he sort of has to take the pen and try to figure out how to get his agenda into law.
So from a practical standpoint now, what does the energy sector believe about this cap and trade? And by the way, at the end of the program, we have a senior executive from an energy company coming on, and we're going to ask him this.
Well, yeah, no, I'd like to hear what he has to say. The reporting I've been able to do today is that there is some sense that this will create some opportunity, especially because it's so market-based. I think the real challenge is that these are yet another set of regulations. But in some ways, that's really the reality. In order to have the opportunity to pollute more and to sort of regulate it, this is this is the requirement. The government has to sort of control it.
And I got to wonder, though, are the Democrats on the environmental side really going to be happy with that? Because, as you say, you're basically buying your way into polluting more.
Right. But at least the president can say we are doing something for the environment. And, not only is this important for the U.S., it's also a very important global move because it puts the U.S. in good company with other countries that are actively trying to find solutions to the environmental problems that we have. And that's good.
And does this impact consumers on the ground? I mean, is this something that leads to higher energy prices, for example?
This is certainly an issue. As you know, most of the energy that we use in this country comes from coal, and this really will have an impact on coal producers. And so it is.
And this president has been criticized as being anti-coal.
Absolutely, absolutely, and it is potentially going to increase costs of places where energy is produced by coal. That is one potential side effect. But overall, I think the White House is really happy that they are finally getting some system in place that allows sort of the free market trading of pollution.
Okay, James Blue in Washington, D.C. And as I mentioned at the end of the program, our guest will talk more about cap and trade. From Washington, D.C., James Blue, thank you.
Yeah, let's see if he agrees with anything I've just told you.
We'll get back to you.
Okay.
Thank you. I'm sure he will. Time now for our business ticker, stories making news around the world. There may be such a thing as too hard to get, at least in the pharmaceutical world. U.S. drug maker Pfizer says it has ended its attempt to buy British competitor AstraZeneca. Pfizer had most recently offered $106 billion. That apparently wasn't enough. The merged company would have been the largest pharmaceutical maker in the world. General Motors updating the number of accidents related to faulty ignition switches to 47 from 32. GM says the total fatalities related to the defect remains 13, although the National Highway Transportation Safety Agency says the number is probably higher. GM has recalled 26.6 million cars worldwide because of the malfunction. I think that's 2.6 million cars, and that's just a small part of their 13.8 million total recalls this year. The bosses are bossier than ever, certainly when it comes to their paycheck. CEO pay reached a record $10.5 million in 2013 on average, breaking past 8 figures for the first time in history. It's good to be king. These numbers, according to a study from the Associated Press and executive pay research firm Equilar. CEO pay packages have been rising for 4 straight years after taking a hit during the recession, growing 50% since 2009. The highest paid CEO last year was Anthony Petrello, head of oil field company Nabor Industries, who brought home $68.3 million after his contract was renegotiated. Think twice before you click send. That's the message today for rap genius co-founder Maboud Moghadam. He's been fired after posting comments related to the Santa Barbara shooter Elliot Rodgers' so-called manifesto. Moghadam posted annotations to Rodgers' 141-page statement describing the rant as, quote, artful, beautifully written, and referring to Rodgers' sister as smoking hot on Sunday. Well, it took just one day for the current CEO, Tom Lehman, to fire him. Coming up, how many airplanes is too many for a deadbeat rock star? Our favorite person of the day is next here on Arise Exchange.
I think news does make people put things in black and white terms just so that they have a dividing line between what their viewers like and dislike.
When they see a person of color, they either think that they're not gonna do anything, they're either on drugs or they got pregnant at an early age, and I just want to say that that's not true.
It tends to reflect more the interests of the upper income people and the upper income interests.
Arise News, every culture, every angle.
One of the great things about Arise News, it is truly a multicultural global channel that is paying attention to communities of all different kinds, not just here in the United States, not just in Africa, but all around the world, as we're giving a voice to the people that don't traditionally have the kind of a voice that a mass media organization can have. You're getting here at Arise News that you're not going to find at the other networks is a unique perspective, and I think that's part of what Arise is here to do.
Looking at mainstream news stations where only you have a very small minority of people of color being newscasters and actually having prominent roles in the media.
In a newsroom in the United States, maybe 10% of decision makers come from communities of diversity. That's not right.
Well, diversity is important because the more complete the news is, the more accurate a picture you're getting of the world, and the more you can form an accurate opinion of things.
The vision here is not just to tell the main stories of the day, but to tell the news that other organizations don't tell, and tell it in a way that people like me, people that look like me, that look like you, are interested in.
Arise News.
Arise News.
Arise News.
Arise News.
Arise News, every culture, every angle.
Time now for our favorite person of the day, when we pick one person who grabbed our attention. Yeah, not for the right reasons. Today, it is the lead singer of the punk rock band The Offspring, who discovered the tough way that you can, in fact, have too many private airplanes. Say it ain't so. Cessna Aircraft Company is suing Dexter Holland because he allegedly has not paid for his third airplane. Holland tried to fix the situation by selling the plane. The other two seemed like enough, and he gave the funds to Cessna, but he still owed more money and never paid the balance. The suit says he now owes more than $782,000. Now Holland's two other planes may be getting repossessed. It appears it will be economy class only for Dexter Holland, who is our favorite person of the day. Next, what one company is doing to help reduce America's dependency on foreign oil. You're watching Arise Exchange. Coming back.
Here at Arise America, we want to bring you news from a different perspective, and not just news, but analysis as well. Tell me what it was like growing up gay in Uganda.
I have suffered sexual violence, including that has been planned by my family to heal me from lesbianism.
To have somebody lead your child away in handcuffs is just not something that should be done to a 12-year-old child.
You called this Victims Advocate Group, this phone number, which is sponsored by the Catholic Church, correct?
Right.
And what kind of response did you get?
They told me not to make prank calls and it wasn't appropriate, and hung up the phone.
My God. Michael Dunn could go away for many decades. Is that enough for you?
No, it's not. The person that killed Jordan Davis has to be found guilty by a court of law in the United States of America.
Mainstream news has covered all of the issues of the world, which are like this, through a very narrow lens. And at Arise News, we do things different. We cover every culture, every angle. Our mission is to go to these places, to these communities, whether they're in Africa, whether they're in Europe, Asia, the United States, the Caribbean. And we're going to find these stories, and we're going to tell them to our audience. Stories that they probably never heard of before, and stories that they'll find interesting and engaging.
In tonight's Corner Office, America's dependency on oil and the costs associated with it. According to the U.S. Department of Energy, about 40% of the oil used in the states is imported, costing more than $300 billion annually. Domestic oil production for shale formations and improved fuel economy standards have decreased our reliance on oil imports over the last few years, but there's still a long way to go. One of the companies that is at the forefront of trying to reduce the dependency is Torchlight Energy. And the company's chief operating officer, Will McAndrew, is here on Arise Xchange to talk about that. Will, thank you. It's an honor to have you on the program.
Well, Andrew, thank you very much for having me here today.
So, earlier in the program, we were talking about cap and trade. The president is going to impose new cap and trade restrictions or plans starting next week. What is your company and the industry's position on cap and trade?
Well, I think it's a mechanism and a vehicle to help reduce pollution, obviously. But there's also all kinds of other ways and means that my industry is doing exactly that. And just like Boone Pickens says, we have the most natural gas reserves in the world right here in the United States. And you're starting to see buses and trucks, and you're starting to see more refueling type centers. And natural gas burning obviously reduces the amount of greenhouse gases.
And to get to natural gas, you need to frack, right? You've got to go through shale. And there's some controversy about that. But how do you move the ball on that? For example, here in New York, you're waiting for the governor to make a decision about that, while our neighbor, Pennsylvania, is raking in the money on fracking.
Well, not all natural gas production comes from fracking. Now, obviously, there's been a significant change due to the fracking in wells, and there's a lot of regulations in place. And if everybody in the industry, my industry, would comply with the rules that are already in place, you would have significantly less incidents of some of the complaints that you see out there.
Well, let me address that then. I mean, is the industry good at self-policing itself? Because every time you hear all the positives of fracking, but then, of course, when there's a spill, people are terrified that their water is going to be contaminated for 100 years.
Well, but the bottom line is just like any industry. You go and look at the car dealership around the corner. They sell brand new cars. Well, that's just like the Keystone Pipeline. It'd be a brand new pipeline. It'd be the safest way to move liquids and gas from point A to point B. But at the same time, if all the industry if you look at the car industry and then you look over to used car salesmen, who's going to comply with it the most? I mean, there's already all kinds of regulations out there.
Okay, so how do we get the government to either back off on the regulations or put smart regulations in place to get this going?
Well, I think it's a combination of things. And when you're talking about self-policing in the industry, I think all the companies, but I've been in this business for 4 generations, and all of it, Exxon and so forth.
Yeah, you've worked at, what I love about this company is a small cap company. You started in the really big companies.
Well, that's right. We all did. Yeah. And the bottom line is we try to comply with every regulation that's out there, but not every person out there tries to comply with every regulation, and pick any industry.
So you have to kind of lead the way. Is the innovations in the energy sector happening from companies like yours, the small companies, or from the Exxon Mobils?
Most innovation comes from the large independents, not the big, huge oil and gas companies. They're junior oil and gas companies, just like the fracking came out with Mitchell and out of Texas. A lot of these fields that are out there right now were owned once by majors, and then they sold them down, and innovation came through a lot of the smaller companies.
Is it a challenge for you competing against the big guys out there?
Well, it is, but I think in part, we are light, nimble. There's only a few of us in the company. We have some great partners with who we do business with. We're a NASDAQ-traded company, and we have New York Stock Exchange companies and NASDAQ companies that we work with. But I think what we can do for a mineral owner, landowner, is tell them that we're going to do it right, we're going to comply, and give them a drilling commitment.
We have about 30 seconds left. What are key points you want to identify to move us to the so-called energy independence?
Use the resources we have. Use the infrastructure we have. Don't be
including alternative resources.
Again, everybody wants to go alternative fuels, and I'm great for that. But there's been $500 billion spent, and it accounts for 4 or 5% of our energy needs. It needs to keep pushing forward with green fuels, but it's not going to get there overnight. So what can we do? And that's natural gas and oil.
Will McAndrew, thank you so much. This has been a pleasure.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Appreciate it.
Friday on Xchange is the golfing industry heading for bankruptcy. Why experts say thousands are leaving the sport and leaving companies struggling to stay afloat on the back nine. Take a look at the markets once again. The S&P 500 at a record high in 1911. I'm Andrew Schmertz. Thanks for watching Arise Xchange.